All right, so we have seen the skandhas, the aggregates. We've seen dharma, this nature or law of the way in which the aggregates fit together in the instant such as they do. And we have seen samskara, this predisposition of the aggregates to become such as they will. I guess there's a few more terms I would want to bring up to help you begin to get through some of these early chapters that we're talking about with Buddhism. The next term that I would mention to you that comes up is the idea of interdependence. Now, I don't want to give you the Sanskrit for this exactly because it gets brought up in a lot of different ways. The general term, the general term that will be used is something, and this is a mouthful, it's pratichut samutpada. Pratichut samutpada. Basically, what it means is dependent arising, and there's a lot of ways in which this is interpreted in Buddhism. It's often measured through 12 separate links, through 12 separate points in which there is this quality of becoming. If you guys would like, you can let me know, and I'll tell you, I'll do a little lecture specifically on Praticca and dependent arising sometime a little later. But for our purposes right now, really what its importance is to see the way in which it points towards the necessity of interdependence in things being what they are. And let me say what I mean by that. The necessity of interdependence. Basically, what the necessity of interdependence points to is that there is no way in which a thing can be a thing such as it is. You gotta look back to what we were talking about earlier, but a thing being a thing, such as it is, so in the instant, such as it is, without being shaped by each and every other thing, such as it is in the universe. You are what you are. You think what you think. You see what you see. You feel what you feel, such as you do in the instant that you do, with Dharma that you are. Why? Because everything else in the world allows that to be the case. Everything else in the world, such as it is, I told you were going to get sick of this, such as it is, stands in a way that allows for all the other parts to make you you, and for you and all the other parts to make them what they are. Everything is what it is because it's a place within a web, right? It's a place where this netting, this nexus occurs in this web of possibilities in the instant of reality. And I'll use the term from Buddhism, in the Dharma of reality. Every moment is this interdependent moment in which all things are what they are, such as they are, because of this instant of being, right? Where everything hangs and is what it is, interdependent with everything else. This is the idea of Pratichut Samutpada, interdependence, or dependent arising. It's a fundamental principle within Buddhism, within all forms of Buddhism, this idea that there is this basic way in which things are, they are what they are. So we have this interdependence. One more concept I think I need to bring up within this tradition, and that's the idea of nirvana. Within Buddhism, there is still a sense of moksha. As a matter of fact, if you read Buddhist texts, especially later Buddhist texts, you will occasionally even see in the Sanskrit the word moksha used once or twice. But moksha, the idea of liberation from samsara, it's seen as a very generic and general and less than helpful term because it doesn't really clarify anything. The term that's used far more often in Buddhism is nirvana, or in the Pali, the language that the dialect that the Buddha used of Sanskrit, Pali, is nibbana. So nibbana or nirvana in Sanskrit. This does mean liberation from the cycle of samsara, but it means it in a real specific way. Nirvana, the term nirvana, comes from a sermon, one of the first sermons that the Buddha gave very early on, in which he was asked by a series of scholars what happens to the self when it escapes nirvana, if in fact it never existed and never had any reality to it in the first place, and how can something that has no reality ever come to find any sort of liberation. And what they tried to do, what these scholars were trying to do, is trying to essentially trap him cleverly within debate. And what the Buddha would do, indeed you can kind of see this even in the readings that you're looking at here with the teachings of the Compassionate Buddha I'm having you read. What the Buddha would often do is respond to these questions with a question. And this is certainly what happens when he first articulates the idea of nirvana. What he does is he says, when you ask me what happens to the self that does not exist and how it can be liberated if it does not exist, I would respond, where does the flame go when it goes out? And the answer is, of course, that it doesn't go anywhere, right? The flame, when it is blown out, doesn't vanish. It doesn't go to Jupiter. It doesn't go to Havana. It doesn't go on vacation. It doesn't go to heaven. It doesn't go anywhere. It simply ceases acting because really the flame never was. It was just a byproduct of an activity of burning of the wick. So it is with the self. When the self achieves liberation, when it stops this process of grasping and grasping and grasping and reiterating this cycle of making it seem as though there is a self again and again and again and reiterating this suffering, it's not as though it goes anywhere. There is no heaven to go to. There is no salvation place to go to. Rather, what happens is it simply goes to the place where the flame goes when it's blown out. Namely, it ceases. And insofar as that's the case, it doesn't go anywhere because really it never was. It was a misunderstanding. Right? This is what we see within Buddhism. Now, it is not as though death is nirvana. Because after all, death, in the sense of our body ending, isn't really the ending. When we die, it's not as though the cycle, the energy, the process of grasping, of reiterating, of doing these things ceases. This is still continuing on and on and on. A little like a stone tumbling down a hill. Just because it comes past a particular point doesn't mean it stops tumbling. It just means it's past that point. Well, so it is with us. It's not as though that this cycle of grasping, the cycle of reiterating the delusion that there is a self, ceases when this particular self, with these particular feelings, stops. I mean, after all, that happens in each and every moment that we're alive, doesn't it? I can't remember vast swaths of my life. You ask me what what it was like when I was 4 years old, 5 months, 2 days, and 14 hours. You know what? I can't remember. You asked me what it was like when I was 15 years old, 4 months, 7 days, and 5 hours. Don't remember. And there's a whole lot of other days and minutes and hours and periods of my life that are just vanished, gone. And yet, I continue to persist. Why? Because there's some sort of eternal me? No, it's because the process continues to persist. And even when this body dies, when this physical thing stops acting the way we're used to it, it's not as though I end exactly. At least I don't end any more than I've already ended. Rather, it's more like a sharper bend in the river. There's a sharper change in what I am. But truly ending this, truly overcoming these things, is not death. It's overcoming this predilection, this disposition, this samskara, this tendency to grasp in the things that we are. It's organizing ourselves in the dharma that we are, in the instant that we are, to see precisely what is. That is what it takes to achieve nirvana, the blowing out of the flame, the burning, the persistence of the delusion of what we are. All right, more later.